All right, good afternoon. We're going live today with Dr. Rachel Greenberg, a clinical psychologist who is also a trauma-informed clinical psychologist, and here she is now. And today we're talking about the topic of healing through dating and dating while healing. All right, let's have Dr. Rachel in.
All right, here we are. It's good to have you.
Good
So,
to see you.
yeah, so we decided to go live today because on the 28th, we are hosting a really fun workshop and a really meaningful workshop that kind of explores the intersection of healing and dating.
Mm,
And the reason we kind of came up with this topic is because I think both of us in what we do get the question a lot around like, if I'm still healing, can I be dating?
right,
And how can dating be used as kind of fuel for our path of healing? And
right.
so that's the topic we're exploring today. I want to see what other thoughts and notes you have, just high level on that.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been a while.
It has. And you're fresh
Um,
off retreat.
I am. I am. Yeah, it was so beautiful. Oh.
I'm like soaking up your post retreat vibes.
Well, you actually feel really calm and centered to me this morning too. So yeah, yeah. It's nice to be with you.
Likewise. Yeah, likewise.
Um, yeah, no, I think there's so many layers here,
Oh,
when
yeah.
it comes to the topic, and there's so much space to discern for oneself around readiness and what it means to heal and date. So, yeah, and I think humhum, my experience of it and the opportunities you facilitate for people in and of themselves feel healing
Mm.
for people. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting question for daters.
So if we can unpack some of this, because I think that's accurate, and I've had people say that and share that about finally feeling like, oh, this is a place that just feels really supportive and feels really healing on this dating path.
Right.
What do you think like allows for some of that, just from your perspective and your background, to take place? Like what
Hmm.
allows for healing to start to do its work?
Yeah. Mm. I think we start with the awareness, that
Yeah.
being conscious of what comes up for us, which, Hum Hum offers people the chance to be aware of what they're bringing and how they're reacting. And so I think that's where the rubber
Mm.
starts to meet the road, because then we can work with what we notice.
Yes. Yes, I think you're pointing to something super important, which is the aspect of awareness is a core facet of where healing can start.
Right.
And instead of being caught in the thing or reacting to whatever experience you're in, like being fully in it, you are aware of it in whatever that is, whether that be thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. Um, Narratives cropping up. I mean, anything that you can start to draw your attention towards, it
Mm-hmm.
starts to give you more space to then be like, okay, yes, this is coming up for me. Where is my kind of choice? At least we can then pause and kind of see um, how we want to respond or how we want to meet ourselves, whether it's a really intense emotion or a really like an emotion that feels super disproportionate to what's happening in the situation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'd love to talk or have you share more on this notion of readiness, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's really no perfect time. Like no one can ever be fully ready, right? Like life, if you're fully ready, it's like that's like a guarding mechanism, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah,
So talk a
right.
little bit about that notion of readiness when it comes to dating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate what you're saying around like telling oneself that they'll, they'll approach love and that experience when they're ready can sometimes be a self-sabotaging trap, because it'll never, maybe what if it doesn't ever, what if you're never really ready, or if we tell ourselves, it can be a way to avoid getting into the mess and muck and vulnerability that love requires and that connection asks for.
Yes.
So I think it's like, notice if that's kind of a story you tell yourself that keeps you from maybe entering something that the heart really wants. I think that's what I would say. So that being said, I think we have to know for ourselves if we really are. And and sometimes we're not. Like sometimes we're in the throes of a heartbreak, or we're overwhelmed with work stress, or we're, it's like, and then it might be really wise for us to take time away to be with ourselves, to get really clear on where our priorities are, what we're focusing on, what our values are, what we need to be able to show up in a way that's as open as the dating process deserves.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important point. It's almost like there are kind of two things we're looking at. It's like willingness, like, am I willing to kind of meet all that? Because I think a lot of us don't even want to acknowledge, like, it's like you can never be too ready, because it's always going to still have all the complexities that it is to be in relationship, period. So when you're dating, it's like there's always that. So there's like the willingness aspect, and then there's like the capacity aspect, like how much emotional, mental bandwidth do I have to meet this as authentically as possible, and feel good about that. Like, and so it's almost like the capacity part, we work on that. Like that's something we can kind of cultivate, and it ebbs and it flows. And then of course there's like circumstantial stuff that, might we might take a hit. So we'll have less capacity. Like you're pointing to, you're saying like, okay, I just got out of a breakup. Like maybe it isn't the best time to like throw yourself back out there and like start dating, or maybe it is. And it's really about you checking in with, your own heart and mind and body. And and then the willingness part is like talking to, am I able to accept to be accountable to my experience as a dater? Like that's a whole other question.
Right.
Yeah. So someone has posed the question, how do I know that we are ready for a new relationship and dating? I'd love to hear you talk to that. Safa.
Yeah, and it kind of is, this question of, am I ready? I think you can ask your heart. I think just, it's really a matter of deep self-attunement and checking in with what you desire from a pure-hearted place. What does your heart yearn for? What do you, what are your values? What's really important for you to prioritize when it comes to relationship and dating? And then it's like, more concretely, it could be like, how open do I feel in my body to receiving and giving love, to giving and receiving love? How connected do I feel to others in my life who aren't of romantic nature? Like, how much time do I have? What are the beliefs I have about what it means to begin dating? And, like to really start to explore what you're carrying in terms of what it means to date and enter relationship. And I think if you sit with that long enough through journaling or meditation or, these practices to connect to yourself, you'll know.
And I think it's an ongoing discovery too. Like, I think we have this notion that dating has to be like, okay, I'm ready to date. I'm going to go on the apps and I'm going to swipe. It's like, it doesn't have to look like that. It could be you're out, you're living your life, you find someone attractive, you're interested to just connect with them.
Mm.
Maybe that's your date for the day. That's your way of dating for that day. Or maybe you're even just acknowledging that that's there for you in your journal. And that's your version of like, starting to date for the day. It doesn't have to be this very mechanical kind of like swiping, hunting thing. It could be as simple as just acknowledging the fact that there's this interest to connect in a romantic way with people. Okay, that's there. How do I want to meet that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And like, and that if it turns out you approach it and something comes up that feels too overwhelming, or you get flooded, or there's triggers, you can take a few steps back, like
Right.
to your point, that it can be an ebb and flow process, that if you start to feel into it and it doesn't feel quite right, you realize you're not really fully as ready as you thought you were, you take a few steps back and explore what you need.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be this really concrete thing. It could just be like, what does dating look like for me this week? Or
Right.
what would it feel like to date this week? And if, I've heard a lot of talk around like, oh, I'm going to date myself. Great. So what does that look like for you this week? That's also dating. That counts. That's like preparing yourself for, being more available to relationship. And I think as long as like there's being mindful that that doesn't slip into this kind of defendedness of like, I'm just going to focus here and I refuse to go there. It's like, if there's an intentionality, beautiful. But if you start to notice then like you're guarding, okay, that's there too. And like all of the experiences, you can start to work with those things.
Right.
So,
Right.
and, and, this idea of healing, like it's ongoing. I feel like our whole lives we're kind of healing. So nobody's like fully, unless you're like a really fully realized human, like none of us really are.
Right.
Like there is no perfect state
Mhm.
to hit
Mhm.
to then
Mhm.
be ready.
Yeah. Right. Right. That kind of the trap of, perfectionism might even come up around that. Like I need to
Yes.
have my life fully together or be
Right.
totally and that I think is a trap and can keep,
Yep.
someone from giving and receiving love. Um, and yeah, I mean, what I really see and believe and notice and teach is that a lot of the healing that we need to do is dormant
Mm-hmm.
until we experience the interpersonal dynamic that only can trigger parts of
Yes.
us that we don't have access to without being in
Yes.
relationship to each other.
That's true. Yeah. I totally can. I resonate with that. There's a lot that gets unlocked, that is revealed in a dynamic with another human being, especially in a romantic context. And I think we can start to look at some of that in any of our relationships where we're going into judgment or frustration or any of that. It's like, those are other beautiful examples where that healing work is still ongoing. So then the romantic layer just like adds a whole, different level of richness to those explorations and that healing. Um,
Right.
and I think in some way, it's like maybe we're asking the question, like, am I ready? Because we fear, like, trying to find the words, we fear that if
Mm.
we're not ready, we'll experience more pain. So it's a way to keep
Right.
ourselves
True.
safe and um, protected. And I think even just being like, I'm nervous, I do fear pain. Like, okay, amazing. That's
Right.
it's important thing to acknowledge.
Right. Yeah. And to validate and to, and there might need to be some real holding between the part of you that's choosing to take the risk to love, knowing, it might end in heartbreak, that, there
Yep.
will probably be hurt because just by nature of being in relationship,
Mm.
there's these ebbs and flows and ruptures and repairs and disconnection coming back to connection, and some of it can really hurt. And um and so, like, one's capacity to choose it anyway because it matters enough, can be kind of like this self-leadership that I talk about sometimes. Like, it can be a way to assure the parts that are terrified of what it would mean that it's okay even if we hurt. That we're here for ourselves through it. We're doing the work to know how to be better, to show up in a way that makes it more beautiful, even if it hurts. Or, so there's, I think, that there's a way to validate that fear without letting it decide for us what we do or don't do when it comes to, being in love.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not really about getting it perfect or getting it right. It's almost about your capacity to, like, if you get it wrong, like, be right there for yourself when you're on the floor and like devastated. And it's like, I'm here, I got you. We're going to get back up. We're going to just hold this, like, whatever this is. And, I think that is a part of that capacity of just being kind to the part of self that is like really having a hard time with the level of, whatever it is, the ups, the downs, the twists, the turns, that it is to be in relationship. And Safa said, yes, especially when we have childhood trauma. So maybe you can talk a little bit to that and like the role that can play, because I know that's kind of your zone of genius.
Yeah. I think it's a real entity, when it comes to being in romantic relationship, because our partners in adulthood romantically mimic the attachment needs and wounds we have from being young with our primary caretakers. And so if there was trauma then, and we're not healing it, or even if we are, that these relationships we enter romantically can touch these raw spots, and a lot can come up around that. And it's also through being in relationship as adults that we have what in psychology we call these corrective emotional experiences, that it's this beautiful chance to get right for ourselves what we didn't have power then as children to be able to overcome. And so it's such rich terrain. And to anyone who's, in the depths of their trauma healing around that, I would say, like, go slow and trust, listen carefully to what's there, get therapy, be active in looking at that for yourself, so you can, be an open invitation for potential partners or an ultimate partner to help you heal, and vice versa. Because we don't, the tragedy I see is when we stay unconscious to the trauma we carry and we perpetuate it in our adult romantic relationships, and believe the story that this is just how it is, as opposed to like, no, there's so much fertility around healing what we've been through, in how we choose to show up now.
Yeah, and I think that really talks to this notion of how the dating experience, the dating path, the path of dating is also very healing. It can be, because you're rewriting your patterns. You're showing up in the way that your younger self wish you were able to, or you wish you had offered to you. So I think in that, we're constantly getting the opportunity to pause and respond with more wisdom, more insight, with all the growth that we've done. And it's one of the most challenging platforms for growth, but it's like, it's because it's so potent. It's like every interaction is like ripe with opportunity.
And just a lot of grace and kindness, and just like unwavering compassion when it comes to where it's hard, or where the pattern shows up and you go unconscious, or you struggle in the old familiar way. That it's, even in those places, especially in those places, how you relate to yourself through the hard stuff matters the most. And then how you learn to Safa's point here, how you learn to re-engage in an authentic way at the relational level also provides the healing. So it's not always about getting it right in the moment necessarily, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point too. One of my teachers, I remember saying, like, imagine yourself doing it perfectly, and if you didn't, just like imagine how you would rewrite it if you could. Because I
Yeah.
think even just for your own recognition, like, oh, this is where that was not great. I could have showed up like this, and not in like a berating way, but in just a really compassionate, like, oh, I see how that happened.
Right.
And I would like to do it this way next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah. And I know we're going to get into a little more of this in our workshop. So, but this notion of relationships as mirrors, I know you have lots to say on that, but maybe you can kind of give a prelude on what you mean about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on it even a little bit so far today. Just that, you know, the people who come into our lives are these beautiful reflections of the parts of us that we don't see, we struggle to see, we don't want to see, we don't know how to see, but that like they perfectly point us exactly to the places in ourselves that we need to understand better so that we can show up in ways that are more aligned with what feels true to us. And so, you know, relationships are our mirrors, or, you know, people we're in relationship with are like these sacred teachers who hold up the mirror and say, hey, like, and usually that shows up in like you know, the impact we have that we didn't intend, the ways we've learned to habitually react and protect ourselves from our childhood trauma. And the people who we're in relationship with come in to say like, hey, that's not, you know, it doesn't work for me, or I don't like that, or what, you know. And when I work with couples, it's beautiful to see the way that, you know, a partner holds up the mirror to their partner saying like, and this is what I notice about how you are, you know. And so it just seems like the people we're closest to give us this opportunity to see ourselves and really help us cultivate a stronger sense of self through that, in the same way our caretakers did growing up. That's what we're here to do for each other in many ways.
Totally. I was listening to a podcast recently with Tara Brach, and she was talking about how sometimes, you know, receiving, she called it criticism, but like, you know, when someone is holding up that mirror, and maybe they're holding it up from their own lens of trauma, pain, hurt, whatever, but you're still getting that mirroring. It might not be delivered in the way that would have made you feel good. But she was saying she was watching kind of her own like inner critic, or critic, not inner critic, her own critic be like, oh, well, if you just said it this way and this way, then like I could receive it. But she was like, oh, that's my own defensiveness, not wanting to just be with the hurt that I hurt someone. Like, and
I heard
you heard that one?
Yeah.
And that really stuck out too, because I think it is easy to always like to go into that, like as soon as the judge appears or the critic appears, you know, that's like our first cue of like, oh, something's being defended. What is it that I'm afraid to touch into within myself, right? If we go into like wanting someone else to have shown up differently. And of course, sometimes it's like valid. Sometimes people are really hard, but I appreciated that perspective.
Yeah. Is that when she was talking about kind of the organization she was taking away?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you know, our ability, that to me is signifies emotional maturity, you know, which we really need to be emotionally responsive to ourselves and each other, which is what love is, you know, that's how we connect. And so if we're not, you know, and to the idea of readiness, that kind of, it feels for me like you might ask yourself, like, how willing am I to reflect on how I show up that may hurt someone, or Because if you're not willing to kind of take the beat to be accountable for your shadow, or, you know, and the impact that has on others, good luck being in close relationships that feel safe.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to work. So that feels really important too. Yeah. Like to own it and to, you know, and if there's shame around it, or if, you know, that's okay. And like how we learn to be with our own shame really matters, because if we're not, then we won't be able to tolerate the impact we have on our partners that might be misaligned with what we intended, and that won't help them feel safe with us if we can't hear them around how we've hurt them.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard when like your capacity isn't lining up with, you know, your understanding or your knowing. Like if you're like, okay, I really want to show up for you, I really want to be able to do it, but like my heart is so closed right now, like I cannot access a part of me that would be supportive, so I'm gonna have to like pause and come back. And I think like it is that dance of just like knowing where you are in any given moment, and like what you can offer or what you can't. And sometimes even your best intentions, like you just can't meet in that moment as you'd like to.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. So, HDBYZ, I don't know how to pronounce that, but says it takes two healthy people to be in relationship. And I like to actually explore this notion of healthy, right? Because I think it goes to that question of like, am I ready? Am I okay enough?
Right.
And so, yeah, maybe we can unpack that word a little bit.
Healthy.
Yeah.
What's coming up for me is Sue Johnson talks about, she's a clinical psychologist and researcher on attachment, and she created emotionally focused therapy, and she talks about the three elements of emotional responsiveness, which compose safety and connection, and bridge healthy, secure attachment, just feeling safe with your partner, like you can trust. And I know we're talking about dating, so people might have different needs and intentions around dating. It might not always be so that they get a secure partnership. So holding that. But yeah, I mean, I think like healthy to me means probably more than this, but just as a baseline, like how available are you to connection? How open, accessible, how responsive are you to your own feelings, to the feelings and needs of others? And how engaged are you with your own process, your needs, your feelings, and others? So available, responsive, and engaged, you know, that's really kind of, I've added some, and I think there's probably more, you know, to say, but as a baseline, like you might ask yourself that would be conducive to experiencing security and connection.
I love that breakdown because I think it's super clear, and it's also like you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get it, you know, right every single time, but available, responsive, and engaged. Like it's an active process always. And I think, yeah, that's really beautiful. I like that distinction. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah. And that if and to that point though, it takes two. That is true. And so if you're the only one, you know, if it's not reciprocal, if there's not a felt sense of mutuality around the embodiment of these qualities, it's going to be really hard to be in something that feels safe.
I also feel I agree with that. And especially like in the context of romance, I think it's extra challenging if one party is like not responsive and engaged and available. Like that's super hard. And I think it's easy to hide behind sometimes where it's like we point the finger again. And so it's like that fine line of slipping into judgment of like wanting someone else to change. And it's like, where can I look, you know, turn that mirror in again? And sometimes us changing actually does shift a pattern because we're showing up differently. The person cannot respond in the way that pattern used to kind of unfold to. So I think it's like a both and.
Yeah, true. And I think there's something really powerful about embodying that which you seek in the other,
Yeah.
and knowing that you only have jurisdiction over your own, how available, engaged, and responsive you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what you have control over. And then you have control over the discernment to just say, like, I don't feel met, or I feel met in that. Because that, yeah, I think that's an important one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will be saving this live. It's going to get posted to our IGTV, so we'll make sure to save it. I know we're at our time. Are you good on time? Do you have more you want to talk to?
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
until 10 a.m. Yeah.
Okay, me too. And I feel like we're kind of touching on some good stuff, so maybe we can go a little longer. And also, if people do have specific questions, we're happy to take anything if you want to just write it into the comment. Yeah. Let's just give people a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we can also talk a little bit more about the nature of the workshop. So we'll be kind of exploring some of these topics more deeply, and then actually give people a chance in little breakout rooms with each other to go into depth with their process with this. And in my experience, sometimes just having community that is like talking about, you feel less alone, number one, but also you get to have a platform to really explore how you're feeling. Right. So yeah, we're excited about that. I'm going to read Safa's question here. How can we be receiving and approachable?
Yeah. To be open to receiving can be a true practice, especially if that's not something you've been imprinted to be open to. Like if there was a, program or a conditioning around you give more than you receive, and that's how you've been deemed valuable. Receiving can be like a profound practice and can feel really vulnerable, and empowering. And so, yeah, I think, what I see a lot with people around, ask your body, how open is your body? How much space, do you feel like you have in your body? And sometimes you can just act like, put in terms of posture. I see a lot of people hold their arms like this, or they're, when they're in a conversation with someone, they're over here, but they're, so you can just start to notice even like how close does your body feel to being open to another.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I think the breath is another like thing to watch or pay attention to. Like I'll notice if I'm apprehensive or I'm not in a full, space of receptivity, I will for sure hold my breath, or it's like more shallow.
Sure.
So
yeah,
that's beautiful. And I like your point around like you don't have to be like hardcore actively practicing it in a dynamic. You can just start to pay attention, like you said, with that awareness. Where am I in a receptive space as I move through the day? And then can I practice that? And sometimes, to be fair, it's not safe to be in a full receptive state. So you have to be discerning with that too. It's like, who's worthy of my full receptivity?
Right.
So we have another question on boundaries, how to assert boundaries. I noticed the word allow sticks out here to me, so I'm curious. Can you see the question, Rachel?
How to assertive about our boundaries. My
how to be assertive about it.
Rona outside the door and doesn't allow me to step out also, whereas I feel pressure. So yeah, it sounds like your partner is kind of imposing their jurisdiction onto you, and that feels constrictive, and that you want to assert more of what you need. Yeah. In terms of boundaries, I think it starts by knowing what you need and then basing your limits on that. And really, but even at a higher level, like the attitudinal stance behind boundaries are like, I'm my own best ally and I deserve to be an advocate for myself because my needs matter. And when I know what they are, it helps me know then what my limits are. And if you're and so it sounds like a deeper dynamic here with your partner. So I would just, explore what keeps you from asserting your boundaries and what the fear is around what would happen if you did. And then I would just get really clear on what you need and what the limit is around that, and kind of like high five yourself all the way home with like expressing it
yeah, right. It sounds like your truth is not being first like held and acknowledged by yourself, right? If holding that, you did here, you're like, okay, I feel claustrophobic, I need to feel like I can freely come and go, or whatever that is, whatever that truth is. Right. And then being able to communicate that, or advocate for that.
Right.
Any other questions that anyone has?
Someone else earlier mentioned communication. I don't know if it was a question, or I can't remember exactly what it said, but something about the importance of it.
Yeah, communication is good communication can be challenging. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's true. I think I've certainly along my path, part of my healing work has been learning how to communicate nonviolently, assertively, authentically, vulnerably. And I really believe it's a practice. And when you start to learn sometimes it's about actual vernacular and like structuring, structuring what's here in a way that can be well received and is aligned with what's true. And, and I think it may be less about technique and more about, though, just like I think when it comes to healthy communication, it really boils down to authenticity and vulnerability. And so if we can like take the elevator down to like, what is it really? Because we very rarely say what it really is. We project, we blame, we attack, we stay at like the higher level of anger, but usually it's like deep hurt, deep fear, deep childhood trauma, So I think it's kind of a multifaceted place of practice.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Yeah, and I think the other piece of that is like, if you're really intentional and you set it as best you can, sometimes it's still not going to be met. It's still not going to be received, and not to like judge yourself for that. It's like, okay, I did my absolute best here. Get a pat on the back, and that did not feel good still.
Right. Right. For sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot of beautiful ground. This feels like a comfortable point of closure. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I love talking about it with you. So I'm excited for Monday. I hope those who feel called, it'll be beautiful. It's always beautiful experience at humhum anyway, but for us to be doing it together, and I hope to see people there.
Yeah, please come reach out to us if you have any questions. It's Monday at 3:00 Pacific time, 6:00 Eastern time, and it'll be almost 2 hours. It's just under 2 hours. And we'll really dive into this topic with conversation prompts to explore with each other. And then again, as the full group, we'll be doing some mindfulness practices and kind of a little inward journey to see what's alive for ourselves. And it should be a really beautiful workshop. So I'm excited.
Me too.
Yeah. And welcome back, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexandra.
And I will see you on Monday. And this video will be posted on our IGTV. Dr. Rachel's Instagram handle will be tagged. So if you have any questions further for her, you can definitely check that out. And then the link for this is in our bio, where it says like upcoming events or something, like see schedule. I forget exactly what it says, but event schedule. Thank you for tuning in,
Yeah,
and
thank
we'll
you,
see you.
everyone. Thanks,
Okay. Bye. Thanks.